Hello, everyone. This is the KC7 channel, and I'm Sherry, your host for the Sunday night chat. I am joined by Simeon and Greg. And tonight we are going to talk about, we're going to have an education perspective. And I have heard that these guys put on quite the camp last year in Fayette County, Kentucky. So being an educator, I want to know a little more about that. So, guys, tell me about this camp you guys did last summer.
Yeah, I can start and I'll let Simeon fill in with some details along the way. So throughout the last, 2 years or so with KC7, um, we had started with some college students, some undergraduates. And when we first did that, people were like, college kids can't do this. This is too hard, right? This is something that only experienced professionals can do. And we did it and it was a huge success. So then we moved down to the next level. We went with high school students. And again, people said, that's way too hard. High schoolers will never be able to understand this. It's too technical. And they blew us away. We had an event where we actually had to stop midway through the day and make more questions because the kids were too good. And we had partnered a lot with Fayette County schools here in Kentucky. And they came to us and said, hey, these high school events have been great, but let's push the bar a little bit. Would you be willing to run a week-long summer camp with 4th through 7th graders? Right. So we had only worked with 9th through 12th graders, actually mostly like juniors and seniors, and particularly juniors and seniors who had computer science backgrounds. Right. So this was a huge shift in our audience. And we were like, well, sounds like a challenge, but we're up for a good challenge. So yeah, we'll see what we can do. Simeon, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, and keep in mind, we didn't necessarily have like a year to plan for this, right? So I think it was about in March or April, we had our first like high school events. And then we had this proposal for running a summer camp with, you know, kids younger from that age range. Um, much younger than anyone we had ever tried out this out with. And we essentially had 2 months, 3 months max to put all of this together, um, which was a challenge, I think, right? But I think Greg and I and everyone involved, the Fayette County Public School folks, were willing to experiment, right? Where people, sometimes people are like, okay, well, this thing has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, we're not going to do it at all. But I think they were very much of the kind of like, if we're going to make progress, if we're going to learn something new, I think we have to be willing to do something that hasn't been done before. We have to like try something and be willing to fail and just like see what happens. I think it was a really cool opportunity for them to do that and for us to even trust us to put that together.
So these kids, when you did the high school initially, this is just incredible. Were these kids who were computer science, like pathway kids, or how did you even get access to these kids?
Yeah. So, I mean, we had worked with a number of diverse groups of high schoolers, but we had done 2 different sessions of high schoolers at this same school district. And all those kids were computer science pathway students. Like all of them came in knowing how to program. All of them came in with some baseline understanding of like at least what cybersecurity is at a high level and what it's related to. These camp attendees, that was very much not the case, right? They're not really teaching computer science in 4th grade, although they are to some extent these days. But most of them, maybe all of them, had never coded before. And these particularly were students from marginalized communities in the area, right? These students weren't from the top academic programs. They weren't from some of the magnet academies in the district. These were students who very much had not had opportunities like this.
Yeah.
And that was very deliberate.
Yeah. The idea behind it is that, the camp was about cybersecurity, yes, but it was about so much more than that. It was about like creating opportunity for kids who otherwise wouldn't have gotten that opportunity, right? It was like, hey, here's a chance for you to experience something that, normally you might have to pay an arm and a leg for, right? Or you may never even have access to, right? And essentially just like taking them and then putting them in essentially a different universe of like very different from anything that they've ever experienced before. And I think it was a cool experience, and was, V, the program coordinator, was very intentional about saying like, hey, she went out in her community and say like, hey, who can we find who needs this the most? And I think the camp almost filled up like right away with parents who says, hey, like I would like to put my student in this and give them this, fresh opportunity to do something different. And I think from my perspective and from Greg's perspective and from women's perspective who was there, I think that was a big driver for us, right? Because a lot of the reason that we do the KC7 stuff is to make a difference. And so to be able to like, even if it's a little bit more challenging, to be able to have that sort of impact on students who, really need it, where it makes a difference, that was a really big driver for us.
So were these students handpicked, or were the parents sign them up, or did the kids sign themselves up? How were they selected?
I think there was a lot of parent engagement. Ultimately, these were really young kids, so at the end of the day, it was parents have to say yes. But there were a few students who, had self-expressed interest in the topic. It was a good blend of those kids who wanted to learn more about cyber, as well as those kids whose parents just really wanted them to have that opportunity.
Interesting. So how did you get these kids to engage? Because I could see that they're coming into this, as you described it, this new world, and basically that's exactly what it is. How did you get their attention, and how did they just not say, this is beyond what I can do, I'm not going to do this? How did you get past that?
Yeah, I think the answer is that we didn't always, right? We had a lot of things planned out. So we had about 2 months to plan for camp. We knew that this is a younger crowd, so we'd have to like we couldn't just give them the old razzle dazzle that we did with the older kids and say, hey, here's some data, right? Here's some presentations, like go and have fun, right? You had to like be a little more hands-on. And so we had all these like exercises picked out where we used flashcards to teach them how to use KQL. We had like all these like different games and exercises planned out, but it was essentially just like a more hands-on version of the regular, dog and pony show that we did. And so the day one when we first came in, Greg had put together this cyber mystery game. Well, no, it was just a murder mystery. Greg, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the idea was, and we should probably add a little context for the show here. So typically when we do like a high school event, it's a full school day, right? So like 6 hours. We essentially come in, we talk about the work that we do as cybersecurity professionals, as threat intelligence analysts. And there's a little bit of razzle dazzle there. Like the high school kids are always pretty intrigued by the scope of the work that we do. And like that's enough to really get them hooked. So we basically thought, okay, we have a week-long camp, we have younger kids, like we'll more or less do the same thing we do with high schoolers with a little more hands-on interactivity. And like instead of one day, we'll just do it 5 days, right? Like by day 5, they'll have done it so many times that they'll be great at it. Okay, so context aside, one of those hands-on activities we had planned was it was a museum heist investigation, right? So a key tenet of playing KC7 is investigative mindset. And we wanted to instill that in the students without making them start, like getting on computers right out of the gate. We wanted it to be a little more interactive. So we planned this activity where an artifact had been stolen from a museum, and there were 5 different employees, none of whom actually saw the artifact get stolen, but each of them had like a little piece of the story, right? Like the janitor might be able to tell you that they saw someone acting suspiciously, and that person looked like this, red hair, denim jacket. The gift shop clerk could tell you that, of course, they didn't see who stole the artifact because they weren't in the exhibit, but they saw a woman with a denim jacket and red hair who was buying like a replica of the artifact that was stolen, right? There were 3 other scenarios, but basically the idea was the kids had to work in teams, go around and interview humans and ask very specific questions. That was really the main objective of that activity. Like, you can't just go up and say who stole it. And at the beginning they did.
That's
That was their
exactly what
first
they did.
approach. They just walked around to everybody and they're like, was it you? You know, did you steal it?
Even if you weren't in the game, they would just walk up to you like, "Oh, you were the one." I'm like, "I'm not even playing."
Yeah, exactly. But by the end of this activity, you know, it went on for maybe an hour or so. At the end of the activity, they were asking very detailed questions like, hey, do you know anything about a red-haired woman with a denim jacket? Or did you see anyone between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. in this specific part of the museum? And they were really paying attention to all the clues they had collected and like synthesizing that to tell a story and make a guess about what happened. That was a long-winded answer, but that was the museum activity.
So they
Yeah.
went into more of a critical thinking than just your basic level thinking questions.
Yeah, that's what we started with.
Mhm.
That's what we should have stuck with. But the rest of our plan was kind of reverting back to the old methods, right? We said, hey, we're going to get them hooked on with this exercise, and then we'll go back to like teaching them KQL with the cards, which worked. And then we got them, you know, looking at writing queries in ADX, in Azure Data Explorer. And Azure Data Explorer, if you don't know, is it's like an online data query tool that we use for our job. That's what we use in KC7 to query the data sets, essentially. And the big idea was here is like, can we teach like middle schoolers and elementary schoolers to do this? And to an extent, the answer was yes, right? Like when we did the teaching KQL using flashcards, I mean, they thought it was a bit trivial, right? Because they were like almost digital natives. So for them, it was very intuitive. You know, they were kind of like yawning when we're teaching them about like, hey, like here's what a table looks like. And some of the kids picked up to like KQL really quickly. I think the biggest challenge we had was that like when you're working with a crowd this young, like keeping their attention is like really, really hard. And so that's the other thing that we had to fight with. And so although like some students were like really into the KQL thing, like keeping the attention of all these students and getting them excited wasn't uh proved to be a little tougher than we had anticipated. So we had to, you know, go back to basics and reevaluate things a little bit.
And I want to go back and just talk a little bit about like the first 15 minutes of camp, right? So you have to like step into our shoes for a second. We spend 2.5 months of pretty intensive planning, like thinking very deliberately about how can we change this so that it'll be captivating for students, for young students. And like we even had a little push, right? The last weekend before the camp, Simeon and Wayman got in town on Friday, and we spent, you know, most of the day Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, making some last minute tweaks. So we really thought we had cracked the code. And we show up at like 6:30 a.m. the morning of camp. Camp starts at 8. We get in there, the kids start rolling in at 7:45. And you know, we had our slideshow prepared. And we go to start camp, and it's chaotic in there, as you can imagine. You've got however old 4th through 7th graders are, 30 of them running around, haven't seen each other all summer. And like the very first thing is like, how, you know, like we're not educators. We don't know classroom management skills. How do you get the attention of 30 4th through 7th graders and get them to listen to you for any amount of time?
I realized that like we hadn't asked any questions about that. And I realized that we had absolutely no skills of doing that. I'm like, what does one say? Like, I was like, I imagine everything, but that is not a thing that I thought about we needed to know. And I had never asked anyone questions about that.
Yeah, exactly. We had asked questions about like, you know, do you think like, will they understand this? Is this too technical? Like, is this interesting enough? But we never asked a single question about like, how do you get and keep their attention? Like when they're being rowdy, you know, how do you like bring the room together? It was just one of those like, oh, wow, we did not think about that moments. And I remember, so we finally get their attention and we're like starting to go through the slides. And we're like, okay, who's excited? You know, are you guys excited to learn about cybersecurity? And it's just crickets. And this kid puts his hand up and he's like, I'm hungry. When's breakfast? And Simeon looks at me and he's like, what have we gotten ourselves into?
Keep in mind, this is like 15 minutes into like a 5-day, like 6 hours per day camp. And I'm like, oh boy, we are way in over our heads. Like, what did we sign up for here?
And you think cybersecurity is hard,
Oh
dealing with
yeah.
3rd through 7th grade. Hey, welcome to my world.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt the
that was
first day I taught.
objectively, that was the hardest week of my entire year. Objectively.
No
Yeah,
doubt. Yeah.
yeah. That just the fact that you guys were able to get their attention is is on another level, honestly. Because that age group is very, I taught middle school, very difficult to hold their attention. So hats off to you guys that you even figured out how to do that, much less present the very technical content to these guys. So you got their attention. How did you have to tweak things as you went along?
Oh, we had to tweak a lot. We didn't get their attention. I think it was there were ebbs and flows, right? Where we had like things lined up and we would like have a plan for the day, right? For like these exercises we do and we try it and then like it just wasn't sticking or like they just weren't interested. And so literally like we had like these posted notes of like feedback in the back where we'd like write, here's what we learned, right? Here's what's working, here's what's not working. We had it in the back, we had high school students. We didn't mention some of the students that had done the high school sessions with us were actually camp counselors. So they were actually helping us run the camp, which was super cool because they just learned how to do KC7 like months ago. And now they're like experts in the game, knowing how all of it works, and then like teaching this to a younger crowd. And that's something I think we can talk about a little bit more. It was truly a transformative experience for them and for us.
Yeah.
But we had a plan, and like throughout the day, we would just like literally scrap entire things that we had spent 8 hours planning for. It was just literally like just like cross it out, saying like that's not gonna work anymore based on like I think we had like a box exercise where we like cut out all these cards, spend money buying these boxes, and like we had this whole exercise, and we're like, based on how things are going, like this is not gonna work. The students aren't gonna catch on to this. And so we literally would just toss out entire things like that. And I think by like Tuesday, was it Tuesday evening? Tuesday evening, and we'd like it was like a full day of like KQL with like 4th through 7th graders, and like they were like some of them were getting it, like we're getting there, but like we were just like losing them. And the plan for the next day was just to do it again. And Greg and Wayman and I looked at each other and we're like, if that is the plan for tomorrow to do what we just did before 8 hours, that's not gonna work. Like between the three of us, we can be realistic, right? Like that is what we have planned. It's going to fail, and we already know it now. And so we just had like it was a very sober moment of like, what is about to happen here? Like this can go downhill very fast from here. And I remember V, the program coordinator, literally like sat. I mean, she looked at like our body language and like how like despondent we were, and she like had this like, she gave us like one of the most inspiring pep talks of like, hey, you have to remember like why you're doing it. You have to remember like that it's worth it, and that like as long as you try your best here, like whatever you do your best is gonna make a difference in the life of these kids, right? And that was like, I think that put a little extra fuel in us. That like, hey, we're not gonna lay down here and just like let this camp go sideways because things aren't working out.
Yeah, you asked like, did we tweak? I would say tweak is very much an understatement. Like Simeon said, we literally completely threw away things that we had spent a month planning. And as he said, Tuesday night, like after the day Tuesday, when we had more or less an entire day of like the true KC7 experience, like writing KQL, looking at data, there was this moment where it was like, okay, there are two options. We can either A, do what we had planned for the next 3 days and accept that it is going to fail. Like it's not going to work. They're not going to have fun. We're not going to have fun. Or it's 5 o'clock. We got to be back here at 7 a.m. tomorrow. We can completely reinvent what we're doing here and hope for the best. And yeah, V's pep talk could not have come along at a better moment.
Perfect time.
She knew what we needed in that moment. And it was very much like, okay, these kids are worth it. There may not be many people in their lives who are like willing to put in the work and do what's right for them. And so we were like, all right, let's go get coffee and let's make it happen.
Wow. And if there's any educators listening to this, these guys, they're teaching. That's what we do. And how many times have we thrown out a week's worth of lesson plans to just basically drop, kick, and punt because what you're doing is not working. So a person goes to school for 4 years and you're never really taught that in preparation. And it's amazing how you guys were just kind of thrown into the mix of it and you learned it very, very quickly. So, yeah. So I want to know what's next. How did you change it? What happened the next day?
Yeah. Well, there's an old saying, I think it was like Muhammad Ali who said, like, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. We got punched in the mouth.
Our teeth got knocked out.
Our teeth got knocked out. I were like, whoa, what just happened? And so, we went home and we sat on Greg's couch and we just said, like, how can we take the things that have worked out so far in camp and like do more of that, right? So we started brainstorming and said, okay, what actually worked this week? And we said, hey, you know what worked? The murder mystery, the museum mystery, that worked.
And
right?
sorry to interrupt Simeon, but he mentioned earlier, right? We had in the back room, we had these Post-it notes. We had red notes for bad things like don't do that again or do this differently. And we had green notes for good things. So we had like an entire wall of red Post-it notes and then like 5 green ones. So when we sat down in this moment, we're like, okay, let's take those 5 green Post-it notes and let's see how we can build on that. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah. So the museum mystery was actually like more of the hit than we had expected it to be, right? Like the students were running around and it was supposed to be kind of like an entertaining start, but we realized that like they're actually learning all of the skills that we want them to learn, right? If we take a step back, right? Like our philosophy behind camp about the cyber camp is not like, hey, you're going to come in here and we're going to teach you a bunch of random cyber stuff that you're going to forget. Because that's a waste of your time. That's a waste of our time. Like realistically, I've learned a lot of stuff that I've like learned today, forgotten tomorrow. What will stick with you is if you can develop an investigative mindset. If you can learn how to think, you can learn how to ask questions, right? You can learn how to piece things together. That will stick to you and that will apply to more than cyber. And so when we went into cyber camp, we always came in day one and said, hey, we're not here to teach you about like random IT concepts. We're not really going to spend an extreme amount of time talking to you about malware or talking to you about phishing. You will learn some of that, yes, but what we're here to teach you, if we succeed at the end of the day, is if you can develop an investigative mindset. And we realized early on that the museum game was allowing them to develop that mindset because we already saw them like reframing how they ask questions just within like the 2 hours that we played the game. And so we said, hey, how can we like take that and do more of that? And we started brainstorming from there. And Greg, I'll let you take over from here. But remember, this is 5 p.m. that we're sitting on Greg's couch. And we're in at 7 a.m. the next morning.
Yeah. So we realized that like the moving around, like the interactivity was good, right? We could not have teams of 5 sitting at computers all day and just playing KC7. That wasn't going to cut it. We also realized that like kids had their strengths. Like we realized in the first 2 days, we got to know the students pretty well. And we realized there were students who like were really good at KQL, like impressively good for their age. We had some kids who were like really good at asking questions. Like they just had this natural curiosity and this incredible ability to, notice small details and like understand why that's important. There were kids who were really strong socially. Like they were good at managing the people within their teams. They were good at motivating each other. Like they all had their strengths. And so we thought, okay, let's take that and how can we break that down into distinct roles? Like how can we make it so that not every kid has to be like writing queries?
Yeah. And before you continue, the point about us reevaluating this is that at the end of the day, we don't want to just do the same thing where like we hyper focus on a set of skills and define success based on like how well do you write a KQL query? Sure, that's impressive. But like, is that the only valid measure of success here if we want every student here to come away feeling some type of accomplishment, feeling better about themselves, being more willing to try this in the future? And so we said, how can we like for every student, right? As opposed to like trying to measure everyone by like how well they can like swim or how well they can we find the strong suit so we can like bring out everyone's uh strengths?
Mhm.
And that was really the point of like figuring out how we can like have different roles to really let students shine where normally they wouldn't be expected to shine.
And
Absolutely.
that's very reflective of like a real workplace, right?
Yeah.
Like if you look at mine and Simeon's team, not every person on our team is analyzing data and writing queries, right? There are people who are managing the team. There are people who are communicating with partner teams, people who are writing based on what we find. Like there are no teams in the real world where everyone is measured based on the same criteria. And so, like Simeon said, it was a combination of like, let's figure out how the students can feel self-satisfaction and feel, rewarded in the work they're doing, but also like, let's be realistic about this and not try to fit everyone into the same shoebox, just like we experience on our jobs. So we were like, okay, teams, distinct roles. Let's let students excel in what they're naturally good at. And then I think for this one, this day 3 was Spider-Man, right, Simeon?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we already had like a pretty fun story for that age group. But we were like, okay, one thing they really liked from the museum exercise is that we had artifacts around the room. So there were like maps and pictures of things, and like they really enjoyed and were really good at like going around and picking up small details from
And they
all
had
that
to
stuff.
talk to people and they had to ask for evidence. So they
Right.
had to like interact with humans.
Yeah, exactly. So we did more of that. We were like, okay, let's make like social media posts and like newspapers and um let's just put all this stuff around the room and like not even say anything about it, and let's just let them explore and see what they can learn from it and see if they can figure out what's important. And we also kept the question asking part in there. So like we positioned ourselves as, I don't remember what we called ourselves.
We were the I think we were like the investigation board or something like
The
that.
investigative committee.
In the investigative
Yeah.
committee, which
So
is actually really fun for me. I
it was
I
great.
had so much fun with that.
It was amazing. So we set ourselves up at the front of the room. It was me, Simeon, and Wayman. We were all at a table. And there were certain things to like move forward in their investigation. They had to come talk to us. There was information like that was the only way they could get it. And so they would come up to us, they would ask a question. And if they didn't ask precisely the right question, or like if they didn't have all the details they needed to have, we would make them go to the back of the line. Because
Yeah.
again, we were trying to instill, right? Like there's importance in asking good questions and in paying attention to details. And so, yeah, the line would be like 5 minutes long and they'd wait and they'd get to the front and they'd say like one wrong word. It would be like, nope, try again. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
And
We
we
had a
just had
blast.
so much fun with it because it was essentially an MBA line. And they'd have to like stand, would say, come up, you can come up next, and ask their question. And if it was like Greg said, if it wasn't perfect, I wasn't a special jerk. I would just be like, nope. And I would say next, just like in the most obnoxious way, just to send them back. And like that got them like riled up a little bit. They were like, oh yeah, like this guy's a jerk. Like I'll show him. I'll get the right questions. And the other part is like there was only one person who was allowed to play each role. We said there was only one person who was allowed to ask us questions. And so, because of that, and because of the different roles that people had on the team, you couldn't just throw someone out. You couldn't just discount that person because every single person of your team matters and you can't win without everyone. You can be a rock star writing KQL. You can be a rock star investigator. You could be a rock star asking questions, but you can't do all three. And without all three roles in there, you can't fail. So you have to like not only do your part right, but you have to figure out how to bring up everyone else along with you. You got to be nice to folks. You have to be, okay, I'll help you out. I'll help you understand what's going on. I'll help you understand the context behind it because I can't win this by myself. We can only win this as a team. And that really like you could see that students start to change how they behaved as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they bought into it very quickly. Surprising to us. We had no idea if it would work. Again, we came up with this at 5 p.m. We launched it at 7 a.m. We were literally printing stuff out at 6:55 a.m. before the students walked in, and we launched this right in the morning. No idea how it would go. And it was interesting seeing them like flow into the roles.
Interesting. And you know, the thing, so many employers nationwide are saying even college graduates are coming out into the workforce and they do not have essential job skills. You guys have incorporated that right into your camp. And you're teaching 4th through 7th graders team building, communication, critical thinking, problem solving. I mean, that's what you guys were doing, which is amazing. And if you can get 4th to 7th graders to change their way of thinking and building problem solving with teammates, this is exactly what we need in education to prepare people.
Yeah.
So that's amazing.
And, you know, we had some principles that we had for the camp that would have a couple of things we had them say every day. Really to get them into the mindset. Because again, like it wasn't guaranteed. We knew it was going to be hard. So we had to give them some type of motivation. And, you know, in our principles that we said, one, I will try my best every day. When I fail, I will learn from it and try again. I will challenge myself to learn new things. I will learn from my peers and help them learn from me. And I will use what I learned to make the world a better place. And we said that every single day with the students.
Beginning and end of every day.
Beginning and every day. And who knew that we would need that
Yeah.
like more than them at the end of the day? Because in order to make that game, we really had to have like a reflective moment and say like, I have to admit right now that like what I am doing is not working, and I have to like let go of my pride and be willing to do something else. Right? Because imagine we had everything planned and then day 3, we literally walk in, and as opposed to like doing the same thing and standing there and teaching, we literally like removed ourselves entirely from the classroom and put ourselves in the corner. And then we put the student, the camp leaders in charge.
The former high school students. Yeah.
So they were running the show now, and we literally sat in the corner. So we like the power dynamics of the entire thing just changes entirely. And because the students don't feel like they're in a classroom anymore, right? Like how they behave is very different, and they buy into the system. And you can tell they bought into the system, right? Because on day 4, on Thursday, we had a second version of the game. And when they walk into the classroom, right? Like day 1, day 2, like Greg and I would like try to give them high fives. They'd be like, loser, like I'm not doing that.
Get
like,
out of my face.
Yeah, like you swear, like get out of my face. We're not doing that. This is corny. Like day 4, when they walk in, they're excited.
That's
Like we're
awesome.
getting high fives. And not only that, but the most important part is they're talking about, we haven't even said we're doing the game again. They're talking about the roles that they want to play. Why? Because they went home and they were talking about that at home. They said, I want to be an investigator today. I want to be like, you're not going to be the KQL writer today. You're not going to be the analyst today. You're going to be X, Y, and Z role. Like everyone already knew what role they were going to play for that day. Right? Like now you have like these like 3D chess games of like everyone trying to figure out like what's going to go on. Like, because everyone already knows what the game is, and everyone's trying to like frame themselves in like the system and like how they're going to best succeed. And they're like reflecting on themselves and trying to find their strengths to see how they can best succeed in the system, which is like really cool. Like really cool just passively hearing these students speaking like that, right?
Absolutely. Especially students this young.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's incredible. That is incredible. So that's day 4 and it's a 5-day camp, correct?
Mhm.
Yes.
So how did you wrap it up and how did you end the camp?
Yeah. So day 5, This was a bit ambitious too. We asked the students to essentially give a briefing on, right? So they're investigating. Day 4 was like the final challenge. We asked them to investigate a ransomware attack against the company that makes Roblox, right? So it was like, it hit close to home. They all love Roblox. There's a ransomware attack, and specifically, the actor demands that kids in Kentucky will not be allowed to play Roblox anymore. So they're investigating this ransomware attack. On day 5, they come in the morning, and we tell them you have, I don't know, 2 to 3 hours to put together a presentation with your groups. And you're going to go stand in this conference room and like debrief our ransomware attack. Like, think about that for a second, right? We asked 4th through 7th graders to present on their findings from a ransomware attack. Like, that's something you wouldn't expect even a cybersecurity professional to do until they're probably like 5+ years into their careers, right? So we told them to do that, and we were like, okay, they're young, like they're not gonna make slides, they're not gonna use Google Slides. We were like, here's some markers and poster board, like go do whatever. And they're like, can I use Canva? And like, can I record a video? And we're like, what? So we gave them a couple hours to put these presentations together. And then probably my favorite takeaway from the entire camp was, well, first of all, the teams that they were in were randomly assigned. Like the facilitators at the district on day 1, they like gave us groups so that kids could like, they knew where the problems might be. They knew like where the friends and the relatives were. So they said, put the kids in these groups. Well, by day 4, we were like, nah, like they need some resilience. We're going to just stick them in groups. So they're not necessarily with their friends. So we pull the first group into the little conference room down the hallway, away from the rest of the kids. And it's pretty intimidating. It's like me, Simeon, and Wayman, some of the camp counselors, like a teacher or two. And we're like, okay, go stand over there, load up your presentation. You have 5 minutes. Tell us what you got. And not only was like the technical, like the technical core of what they presenting very accurate. Like the things they said were all very true, and they communicated it very clearly. But the coolest part was, I think in the first group, there was a kid who like had some trouble reading. Like, they had assigned, we told them they all needed to speak. So this kid got to his assigned part, and he was having some trouble reading what they had written on the slides. And instead of getting upset with him or like laughing at him, they would like chime in and help him read words.
Oh, wow.
Right. And we were like, whoa,
That's
thinking
awesome.
thinking about that behavior shift. And like, these kids don't even really know each other. We forced them into groups yesterday. Like, they don't want to work in these groups, and they're just helping each other.
That's great.
And like, keep in mind, right? Like, we're not talking about abstracts here. We're talking about like they looked at a real ransomware incident in data. Like they had to like write queries and find all the artifacts, just like someone would do in the real world, which is already outlandish if we're talking about 4th to 7th graders. We had attribution. So they literally had to find the malicious activity, like use the artifacts around the room to like figure out like 5 investigative later to see who did it. Like they were talking about front companies, right?
Wow.
Which like that's like very advanced, like even in industry for folks to be talking about investigations at that level. So they solve the investigation, right? Look through, okay, well, this is just a front. Like this investigation is actually being done by these real people based on the artifacts we saw in the room. Condense all of that into a very concise story, and like presented it in a very professional manner. And like they took it seriously.
Yeah.
Like they took it so seriously that I went in there, and it wasn't like, oh, I don't want to be here. It was, I want to do my very best right now because this is important and this matters. You think
Wow.
about like culture shift, right? Like
Yeah.
culture changed throughout the week. It went from like, I don't want to be here, you don't want to be here, let's all goof around the corner, to like, this is a very important presentation that I want to do my best on.
And we weren't even offering prizes, right? It's not like we were like dangling a pizza party over their heads. Like, we told them it was a competition, like we were going to award first, second, and third place, but they really just wanted to do a good job. It was
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's like a teacher's dream to see that happen. That is incredible. So, you did have an award ceremony at the end. Is that how you usually do your camp, whether it's a day or week-long camp?
Yeah, it was really cool. We actually had the opportunity to bring their parents and their family members in.
Okay.
So we finished up presentations like around 1 o'clock, and then the families came and we had a little award ceremony for the last hour. And so we every student got a certificate. Every student got a little KC7 logo pinned on their lanyard. So we said, you're now a cyber defender. We had a little pinning ceremony for every kid, which was really cool. And then we gave out some like attitude, and we rewarded the kids who displayed positive behaviors throughout the week. Kids who were really going out of their way to lift up their peers. Kids who really maybe struggled at the beginning of the week, but just kept at it. Never gave up, never had a sour attitude. So we got the chance to kind of recognize all of that in front of all the parents and in front of all the teachers and faculty who helped make it possible. It was so cool that last day. I mean, the whole week was amazing, but the last day it was really cool just to see how excited the kids were to have their parents there and to have learned something like so big.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think it was especially cool that, you know, we got almost like the best possible outcome, but only by like ditching like our preconceived notions, right? Like we had to drink our own medicine in order for that to happen, right? We had to be like, okay, like you're gonna try if you as a fifth grader, as a sixth grader can learn how to do cybersecurity analysis, or if that is what we're asking you to do, then we have to be able to drink that same medicine, and we have to be able to like let go of our preconceived notions and try something new and challenge ourselves to do things a little bit differently. And I think that was the most rewarding part of it, like, is that like, hey, I mean, these kids like accomplished something. Like, to put in perspective, right? When initially Greg and I would tell people that we could get high schoolers to write KQL and to do investigations, people would regularly tell us that it was too ambitious. Again, we're talking about high schoolers. That like, hey, this is too ambitious. You need to run them through XYZ course. You need to dumb it down. You need to do X, Y, and Z to keep their attention. And Greg and I would always say, no, we think high schoolers can do this. We think college students can do this. And so for like elementary schoolers to do this, for middle schoolers to do this, not only do it, but enjoy it. I mean, we had so many kids who came out afterwards and said, like, I didn't know this was a thing at all. Like, I really enjoy this. Like, I want to do this for a living. Like, I had so much fun. And like at the end of the day, I think that positive association with cyber, right, is probably the most important thing. Like they walk away saying, like, this is something that I can do. Like, I am good enough to do this. This is something that I would pursue if it were an option to me. It was,
Is there one kid in particular or something a child said to you that stands out among everything that you experienced that week? Is there one particular kid or comment that was made that stands out?
I mean, so many.
Yeah, there are a lot. One that stands out for me, there was a kid, I think it was after day 3, right? So it was after we had sort of thrown everything away and tried this new approach. A kid got in the car on his way home. His mom picked him up and he said, Mom, I'm smart. Like I feel smart now.
Yeah.
Oh,
It, go
Yeah.
ahead, Samin.
For me, it was, there were a couple girls in the class who were like fairly quiet, right? Like they're not the loud ones. And so sometimes it's easy to get like overlooked when that happens.
Mhm.
But then we switched this model where like all these different skill sets can be highlighted. And there was this little girl who like we had a challenge of like, hey, like we have the guided investigation, but you can go off the rails and do the attribution. And so you see her like she's like walking around the room and she's looking at the different artifacts. And she's like taking notes. Like literally, like she goes up to like artifact, she stares at it for 5 minutes. She takes a bunch of notes. And then she walks over to the next artifact, and then she stares at it for 5 to 10 minutes, and she takes notes, and then she goes back to them. She's like looking at them over and over again. And then she comes up to us at one point. She says, "I think I've solved it." And we're
Wow.
like write a summary of it. And then she writes like a concise like 2 sentence summary about what happened, in which she literally like says like it was a Spider-Man investigation, so you had to like attribute like who was the bad guy, right? There's a front company involved, like there's business records, there's like financial transactions, and you have to put all that together. And
It was not straightforward. It
it's
was
not
not easy.
straightforward at all. Like you have to like draw several lines. And she like writes like a very concise one sentence, like 1 to 2 sentences. And she said, like, I think this is the person because of XYZ evidence. And like
Wow.
at that point, I'm like blown away. Right.
Incredible.
Right. Because those are like real life skills. These are the things
Yeah,
that people literally in industry get evaluated over. Right. And these are things that people make people make mistakes, like multi-million companies make mistakes doing these things, right? And
absolutely.
you have a little girl at 6 years old, I mean in sixth grade, who's able to do the same type of analysis. Now imagine if she's able to do that over long periods of time. And when she left, one thing she says is like, she's like, like I didn't know that was a thing. Like this is something that I really enjoyed, and she was truly thankful about like having that experience. And there were like several other young ladies like in the classroom who, before like you could easily overlook them. But then like once it came to the investigative piece, you could see that they were really strong. And so one thing that I like about the KC7 experience, and we get this in a normal experience as well, is that like it allows us sometimes to like highlight people who would easily be overlooked. Because sometimes, as an educator, like the people who you notice on the people who raise their hands the most and who talk the most and who have the most to say. But then sometimes if you get a chance to like highlight people and see strengths in people who aren't necessarily who may be the quiet kid in the corner, but like you're like, oh, like wow, like you're really doing something here. Like every time we get those opportunities, it's always really cool to me.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you guys learned as much from this experience as the kids did, right?
Probably more.
Maybe more.
Yeah.
And to that point, I also want to call out, we've talked a lot about how amazing the kids are. The other people I want to make sure we give our kudos to is there were a number of highly trained, highly experienced educators who were
Yeah.
there in the room for the entire week. And they could have on day one when they saw things like slipping off the rails, they very easily could have just taken over and been like, okay, you guys clearly were underprepared. Like you don't know how to handle kids at this age. But they never did that. They very much let us have that productive struggle of like, okay, we touched the hot stove, we got burnt. We're not going to do that again. And had they not done that, we would not have learned nearly as much.
No.
Yeah.
And it was just really impressive to me that they were like, some of them had met us for the very first time on day one of the camp. And the fact that they trusted us enough to let us just roll and not interrupt and not, insert themselves in the middle of the situation. It was really, really impressive. I don't know that everyone would have done that. If I had been in their shoes, I don't know that I would have done that.
Yeah.
So major kudos to them if they happen to listen to this. It was much
Yeah.
appreciated that they let us, learn from that ourselves.
Yeah, and we said it before, but also like the camp counselors rising up, right? Like you
Yeah.
imagine literally we taught them that they just learned about KC7 like months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now they were like teaching. And like at the beginning of the week, they were like kind of like huddling in a corner, kind of scared to do anything and like kind of letting us do it. And by the end, like they were the ones running the show. Like I said, like I was literally on day 4, I was literally hidden in the back room, just like typing on a computer, like playing a role. Right. And they were running the show. Like they were guiding the students. They were building those connections. They were, helping the kids feel more confident and answering questions. And it was really cool to see that growth all around from the counselors as well.
Absolutely. So let me ask each of you this question. What was your greatest takeaway from this experience? Whoever wants to go first.
I will say the greatest takeaway for me is that like sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone if you want to learn something new, or you want to do something that's worth doing, right?
Mhm.
Like I said, like we took on camp knowing full well that it wasn't a guarantee, right? Like it's one thing to say theoretically like, oh, this may fail. Like it was really like a 50-50 or 40-60 whether or not it was going to fail. We legitimately had no idea. Like it could have been like a very, very bad week where the students didn't learn anything and we all walk away looking stupid, right?
Mhm.
But at least we would have known, and at least we would have learned something, right? And we came in there and we say, hey, like this might not work, but we're gonna willing to try it again. And
Mhm.
Dr. Chi and all the administrators who were part of it said, they were willing to take that risk. They said, hey, like we're gonna put like our time, money, and because again, like there's money, like people are spending money to make this happen. Parents are trusting us with their children, right? So like we're willing to make that investment and to make that risk in order to make a difference for these kids. And sometimes if you want to do something worth doing, you have to put a little bit of skin in the game, right? You have to risk something. And that's what we did. And I think because there was so much at risk, right? The reason we stayed up, I mean, we stayed up until 2 a.m. like 3 nights in a row to make sure this was a success. And the only reason we do that is because we had skin in the game, because it was important for us to succeed, because it mattered. And I think, when you put things in that perspective, pressure makes diamonds, I think.
Absolutely.
Beautifully said. That's a tough act to
Yes.
follow. Mine's along those lines, but I would say my biggest takeaway was, don't be afraid to fail. I think one important thing to consider from our perspective is like, we had never received anything but excellent feedback about KC7. Like everyone who ever played it loved it. Every session we ever did went flawlessly, better than we could have expected. And day one of that camp was a failure. Like
Yeah.
it did not go well. It was a disaster. And honestly, it was hard to admit that our game wasn't perfect and that the work we had done for 2 months was not the right approach, right?
Yeah.
And we could have easily just made it, kept on and tried to make it work. But the only reason we had such a positive experience is because we were okay with looking at ourselves and saying we were wrong, and like what we thought was perfect was not, and we needed to challenge our assumptions. So I think that has affected the entire journey of KC7. Like I think since then we have been a lot more comfortable with like pushing things that are working okay. We're like, okay, let's disrupt this a little bit, right? Like let's
Yeah.
try something different because maybe it'll be better. And it's been just a huge positive influence on the entire direction of KC7. And even for me personally, like it was just a huge takeaway of being like, challenge your own assumptions and be okay with being wrong.
So what's next on the horizon for KC7?
So many things.
Yeah, a lot of things. We're hoping to do a lot more of these camps in the future. Don't know exact dates yet. But I think we have something special with the way we figured out. And I think the cool thing is we only did it twice and we did it under immense pressure. So if we actually got down to like evaluating like, hey, here's what actually happened here, like there's like huge, like I mean we can go very far with this type of game.
Mhm.
And not just with cybersecurity, right? Because essentially it's a framework, right? Like, yes, it was a cybersecurity game that was at the center of it, right? But it was essentially just a very different way of like letting kids collaborate and learn something new, right? So you could really inject like anything else into that like into that like method of like interaction and playing. Um,
Absolutely.
so I look forward to working more of that and trying to figure out how we can flesh that out a little bit more.
Do you think you can go younger with younger children? Have you thought about that?
I think there are definitely parts of what we did at camp that could scale well to, all the way down to kindergarten. I think
Mhm.
another huge takeaway for me is like, don't underestimate young kids. And
Mhm.
the educators kept telling us that, right? We would be like, maybe we need to like have a day of doing this like at an abstract level. And they're like, no, push them. Like, don't dumb it down, push them. And they were right. So yeah, I'm not gonna say no, we couldn't go younger. I think we could.
Awesome. So for the educators that have watched this and are thinking, how on earth can I get these guys or get this program into my school, get it into my curriculum? What's the next step for these guys?
Yeah. I mean, send us an email at events@kcyber.com. Especially for high school uh, educators, we can help you self-host KC7 sessions in your classroom. So if you want to have students play against each other within a
Mhm.
classroom setting, have fun against each other, it's a really fun, I think, competitive thing that you can get students going back and forth. And it's a really kind of addictive game where you don't realize you're learning. And we're happy to get you set up. Where you can set it up so that students play. And really, it's not too much work. It's not very much work. We give you all the instructions. We give you what resources you need to send to the students, and you can get going in a very short amount of time. So just send us a message, or look on our website. Send us a contact on our website, and we can help you get going.
So I would not need to be a strong computer science teacher in order to have this as part of my curriculum.
Nope, not at all.
Okay, awesome. Any closing remarks before we end this chat tonight?
None for me. It's been exciting reflecting on the camp. I think it was just one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire life. And I think we have a really fun day job. But this ticked a lot of boxes that, you don't typically get to in our job. So very, very rewarding, very cool experience.
I would say, reflecting on those principles, right? Like we had them for the students, they helped us out. But when it comes to like people trying to break into cybersecurity, like sometimes those are the principles you need to adhere to. Because oftentimes we like self-eliminate, saying like, hey, like I'm not good enough for this. Or like this is too hard. I think once you reflect on that of like, hey, saying, hey, this is going to make me uncomfortable, but I can do it. I just need to spend the time and I just need to try again and I just need to ask for help. Right. I think that can help you go a lot further. And I think those are the like not just for students, but I think these are like general cases ever principles about how the game works. Like there's going to be some struggle in the game. And sometimes, I'm a jerk when I'm making the questions and others are jerks. And so we make intentionally the questions so that you have to like spin your wheels a little bit. Right. But at the like it's like a rainbow and like you have to go through the struggle. And like at the end of the struggle, right, when you finally figure out what it is that you're looking for, that is the most satisfying feeling. And over again, people come to us and they're like, I just figured these things out and I am over the moon. Like they don't have no idea what to do with themselves. There's like and that's kind of a feeling that we chased. We talk about that sometimes. There's this feeling about like when you're chasing something for so long and you finally figure it out, best feeling in the world. That's the feeling that you get. I mean, it is an incredible feeling. Um, and so that's what we try to give you through this game. So like keep at it. Don't knock yourself out. Keep going.
Simeon, could you list those 5 principles again? Because I think those are so important.
Yeah, and we can list them in the comments as well. Number
Mhm.
1, I will try my best every day. Number 2, when I fail, I will learn from it and try again. Number 3, I will challenge myself to learn new things. Number 4, I will learn from my peers and help them learn from me. And number 5, I will use what I learned to make the world a better place. Man, I feel like I could write a whole essay on these, a whole book on these.
Oh, absolutely. And what a great way to end this chat. Words to live by for sure. Words of wisdom. So I'm going to go ahead and close this chat. And again, I want to thank Greg and Simeon. And also, if you guys would put in the comments a link, there was a lot of media coverage that week from the local TV stations. So if you guys want to click on a link and watch some of what the media had to say, it was great. It was really, really good. So that'll be available as well. And any topics that you'd like to see on this channel in the future, please send an email, put it in the comments. We'd be glad to tackle it because as you can tell, these guys love a challenge. So we'll try to address those things you'd like to see on here in the future. So with that, I'll say good evening. And Greg and Simeon, thank you so much. And thank all of you for taking your time to watch this. Until next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.